This is the story for all ages. Well, we don't have young ages here. We do have multiple ages. So I'm going to read the story anyway, because most good stories are really for everyone. And this is really a touching story about the power of listening and paying attention to one another and what an impact that can have. This is called Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge. There was once a small boy, Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge, and what's more, he wasn't very old either. His house was next door to an old people's home, and he knew all the people who lived there. Can I have a little more sound in here, Terry? Thank you. He asked Mrs. Jordan, he liked Mrs. Jordan, who played the organ. He listened to Mr. Hosking, who told him scary stories. He played with Mr. Tippett, who was crazy about cricket, and he ran errands for Miss Mitchell, who walked with a wooden stick. He admired Mr. Drysdale, who had the voice of a giant. But his favorite person of all was Miss Nancy Allison Delacourt Cooper, because she had 4 names just as he did. He called her Miss Nancy and told her all of his secrets. One day, Wilfred Gordon heard his mother and father talking about Miss Nancy. Poor old thing, said his mother. Why? Why is she a poor old thing? Well, because she's lost her memory, said his father. It isn't surprising, after all, she's 96. What's a memory? Gordon loved to ask questions. It's something you remember, said his father. But Wilfred Gordon wanted to know more, so he called upon Mrs. Jordan, who played the organ. What's a memory? Something warm, my child. It's something warm. He called in Mr. Hosking, who told him scary stories. What's a memory? Something from long ago, my lad. Something from long ago. He called in Mr. Tippett, who was crazy about cricket. What's a memory? Something that makes you cry, my boy. Something that makes you cry. He called on Miss Mitchell, who walked with a wooden stick. What's a memory? Something that makes you laugh, my darling. Something that makes you laugh. Finally, he called on Mr. Drysdale, who had the voice of a giant. What's a memory? Something as precious as gold, young man. Something as precious as gold. So Wilfred Gordon went home to look for memories for Miss Nancy, because she had lost her own. He looked for the shoebox of shells he had found long ago last summer and put them gently in a basket. He found the puppet on strings, which always made everyone laugh, and he put that in the basket too. He remembered with sadness the medal which his grandfather had given him and placed it gently next to the shells. Next, he found his football, which was precious as gold. And last of all, on his way to Miss Nancy's, he went to the hen house and picked up a warm egg. Then Wilfred Gordon called on Miss Nancy and gave her each thing, one by one. What a dear, strange child you are, to bring me all these wonderful things. And then Miss Nancy started to remember. She held the warm egg and told Wilfred Gordon about the tiny speckled blue egg she had once found in a bird's nest in her aunt's garden. She put a shell to her ear and remembered going to the beach by tram long ago and how hot she felt in her buttoned-up shoes. She touched the meadow and talked sadly of the big brother she loved, who had gone to war and never returned. She smiled at the puppet on strings and remembered the one she had shown to her sister, and how her sister had giggled with her mouth full of porridge. She bounced the football to Wilfred Gordon and remembered the day she met him and all the secrets they had told. And the two of them smiled and smiled because Miss Nancy's memory had been found by a small boy who wasn't very old himself. So actually the next reading, that was really the first reading. The next reading was written by a colleague of mine, the Reverend Jan Carlson Bull, who I'll be see at GA in a few days. I'm leaving from here and driving to the Badlands to camp, and then I'm going to go to Montana and camp for a day, meet up to GA, and then I'm going to go camping in Glacier for another week after that. So this is first stop on a really fun road trip. It's great to be here. So my colleague, the Reverend Jan Carlson Bull, shared this reflection. She turned her head away from her companion, and we locked stairs. As she stood on the steps of the church, not quite recognizing me, she lingered, unsure of herself. I had perhaps changed more than she, but I shouted her name as soon as I saw her. I couldn't believe it was her. She hesitated, not yet making the connection, not yet ingesting my face. It had been many years. Then she too let out a whoop of recognition. Our paths had intersected and meshed so long ago, it's as if it were another life. Yet here she was on this glorious Sunday morning, standing on the steps of the church as I greeted her, and memory took hold of us both. We hold each other's history, she said later that night, over dinner with our spouses. We hold each other's history. Now, switch frames. You're climbing up into the steeple's underbelly, and then you spot them. Initials carved into the centuries-old wood. Years ago, the youth of the parish had found this space, a hideout whose other surface stretched skyward. We want to be remembered, they had said without saying, and out came the pocket knives. The engraving began. We will be remembered, they said silently, leaving their initials behind. History is shaped and held in so many ways that mark the heart. We hold each other's history in memories. Not all are pleasant. Not all make it through the gates of consciousness. Then there are those of which we speak to an old friend, or those of which we speak to a gathered family, or those which we hold up to a gathered community. On a celebrated anniversary, always beginning with the words, "Remember when?" What we say may or may not be exactly what happened, but it is remembered truth with the power to shape the course of what is to come in an evening or in an era. Some say there are two tests to the spiritual life, the ability to give and the ability to receive. So now as we prepare to receive the offering, we will practice both for the ongoing work of this church within these walls and in the community.
Please join me in the reading of the offering ceremony. We give these gifts freely. We receive these gifts gratefully. We dedicate these gifts to the work of our congregation, serving human wholeness, caring for our planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming strangers, loving one another.
So as we enter into the spirit of meditation and prayer, I invite you to take a deep breath, settle your body, settle your mind, your heart, your spirit. You are an entire sacred text. The history of your journey written on the interior walls of your heart. Breathe with the truth of your story. Breathe again with the power of your story. Breathe again with all the joy and sorrow. Breathe yet again with all the courage and the beauty you have witnessed and have been. Breathe with all the wisdom your memories have taught you. May you carry within a tender compassion for your sacred text. May you carry within a tender compassion for each person and each being's story. Blessed be. Our next hymn is number 300. I invite you to rise in body or spirit as you are able. Thank you. You may be seated. A few years ago, on a spring weekend in May, I drove from Wausau, Wisconsin, where I was serving as the interim minister, to Rockford, Illinois. I made the trip to watch my daughter play with her college team in a national sports competition. My husband drove from our home in Minneapolis, and her older brother made a 24-hour train journey from Boston to surprise her. Earlier that month, our son, Elliot, told his sister Alice that he wouldn't be able to come to Rockford because he was preparing to defend his master's thesis in 10 days. And he was, in fact, defending his thesis the next week. But unexpectedly, his last written draft was submitted just in time to hop a train to Chicago. And plans for the surprise began to take shape. I picked Elliot up at the train station in Rockford. And while we were waiting to surprise his sister, my daughter, at dinner time, Elliot was hungry, so I took him out to lunch. Just after we sat down at a table along the window, a young mother and her 3-year-old son walked by. This adorable little guy was wearing bright tennis shoes, sunglasses shaped like stars, and had this head of expansive curls. He was carrying a yellow balloon and had a red sucker in his other hand. He was the epitome of the beauty of childhood. My son waved to the little guy as they approached, and this made the boy and his mom stop. The two boys played peekaboo together through the window. And then the little one held up his sucker to the window, I think for kind of a show and tell. And finally, they gave each other a high five through the glass. As this encounter unfolded, I watched with absolute pride and fascination. When the little guy and his mom finally moved on, my son turned to me and asked, "Do you know why I did that?" Suddenly, I had this incredible sense of deja vu. My son continued, "It has to do with a memory, Mom. One day when I was about 12, we were walking home from the ice cream shop, which was only 3 blocks away, and we passed a parent and a little kid. You stooped down and said hello to the child, and then she showed you her stuffed animal, and you made some goofy animal noises. I was a little embarrassed." Tell me what 12-year-old boy isn't embarrassed by his mother's behavior? But then my son went on to explain. "Mom, but then you turned to me and said, 'Do you know why I did that?' And you told me that you always greeted small children because you wanted them to know that the world could be a friendly place full of surprises." Sitting in a restaurant booth in Rockford, Illinois, 11 years later, my 23-year-old son is recounting a memory. He remembers a conversation that impacted the way he now walks through the world. And I had no idea he was carrying that memory with him. I was stunned by the clarity and power of this tiny moment so many years ago. So one role of memory is to teach. Memory is one way we carry wisdom and experience with us. I know that I certainly carry important lessons from family, former teachers, from friends, from congregation members, even from people whose paths I crossed very briefly. Of course, both good and bad memories can teach. For example, from my mother, I learned the importance of creating fun family rituals at holidays. And while some of these carried over directly into my own family, some of the traditions changed shape. Growing up, we had an annual festive party with about 20 family members gathered to decorate the Christmas tree. My own family is much smaller, and that same experience just didn't translate. Instead, many years ago, I started giving the children a Christmas ornament on the night that we decorated the tree, and that was the first gift they got to open. And the Christmas ornament had something to do that happened in their life that year or something that we did as a family. Now, this past Christmas, I was going to just quit the practice, thinking it no longer mattered to the kids. Our daughter was in town in October and November because she had graduated from college, had walked the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada, and had come home to regroup before she figured out what's next. So she and I were in a little gift shop around the corner, and she spotted an ornament that she thought would be perfect for her brother this year. He's a political organizer, and it was Minnesota with a heart in it. And she was thrilled with her idea, so we bought it. And then I found a great one for her too. Our kids know that when they have their own homes, these ornaments will be boxed up and they will be given to each of them. And when their dad and I are gone, I trust they will hang them on their own trees, telling stories of their lives and creating new memories for their families. One of the other things that memories do is build connections and relationships. While my son told me he remembered me chatting with a little girl on a sidewalk years ago, we had now in Rockford, Illinois, added a new layer of meaning and memory to that first memory. I had just learned something about the power of parenting, of how what we say and do impacts our children. I mean, I knew that, but that experience in Rockford, Illinois in the restaurant, I never could have predicted. And I know that I will remember as long as possible that amazing conversation in a restaurant booth in Rockford, Illinois. So I invite you now to take your hymnals and turn to number 649 in the back. And we're going to read this together if you choose. I will begin again if you will respond to the part in italics. In a house which becomes a home, one hands down and another takes up the heritage of mind and heart, laughter and deeds, laughter and tears, musings and deeds.
Love like a careful open ship across the gulf between generations.
Therefore, we do not neglect the ceremonies of our passage. When we wed, when we die, when we are blessed with a child.
When we depart and when we return, when we plant and when we harvest.
Let us bring up our children. It is not the place of some official to hand to them their heritage.
If let us impart to our children our knowledge and ideals, they will lose all of us that is worthless and full of wonder.
Let us build memories in our children, lest they drag out joyless lives, lest they allow treasures to be lost because they have not been given the keys.
We live not by things, but by the meanings of things. It is needful to transmit the past words from generation to generation.
In a house which becomes a home, one hands down and another takes up the heritage of mind and heart, laughter and deeds, laughter and tears, musings and deeds. We live not by things, but by the meanings of things. It is needful to transmit the passwords from generation to generation. Memories teach, and memories build connections. So now let's go back to Rockford, Illinois. We were all excited to be in Rockford and to see Alice. She was playing in her college's in the National Ultimate Frisbee Tournament. So there they were at the Nationals. She texted us the name of the restaurant where we could meet her for dessert after she had dinner with her team. As soon as she gave us the name, we called this restaurant and asked them to help us plan a surprise reunion of brother and sister. So the hostess and waitress figured out from our description where Alice and the team were sitting in the restaurant. And they told us it was safe to enter the front door without being seen. From there, we planned the moment of surprise. Now you need to know that my daughter is pretty chill. We didn't expect to get a huge reaction, but still thought the surprise would be fun. Kind of keeps her cards close to her chest. So Alice was way across this massive room with her back directly towards us. So when her team's food came out of the kitchen, and there were like 6 of them bringing food, the waitress handed Alice's plate to Elliot. Approaching from behind, he comes to her right side and says, "Chicken salad for Alice." She turns and looks, and looks, and looks. And then she flies out of her chair and throws herself into his arms, and she hugs him over and over and over. Her coach and teammates looking on, having no idea what they're seeing. My husband Michael and I come around the corner of a pillar where we had been spying on this and said, "Her brother." And fortunately, he had put the plate down. She had been to so many of his ultimate Frisbee games as a younger sibling, they're 4 years apart, and now he was there to watch her play in a national level tournament. So Michael and I were quickly banished to a table nearby while Elliot was invited to pull up a chair next to Alice. Not surprising. So my husband turned to me and said, "When we're dead and gone, they're still going to be telling that story." What we did was make a memory. And what I hope the memory tells her years and years later is that we loved her. She had a tough time growing up, and she needed some extra special love. We hope she remembers that that what we were telling her is that it's important for family to show up for each other, and also that life can be fun and full of surprises. At just that moment, Alice turned to Michael and I at the text, gave us a thumbs up, and said, "Well executed. Very well executed." Now the story gets even better. That next Christmas, wait till you hear this part. That next Christmas, Alice got home from college 5 days before I could get home from my interim ministry 150 miles away in Wausau, Wisconsin. And so, and I wouldn't be home until, really late on Christmas Eve. So I was sad not to be able to see her right away. That coming Sunday in Wausau was the Christmas pageant service. It was a service that I wrote when I served a very large church and was the minister of religious education. We had 500 children and youth in the program. Yeah, it was like running a whole school. And so my kids had grown up in that Christmas pageant every year, and they knew it word for word. So Sunday morning in Wausau, Wisconsin, the Christmas pageant is over. All went well. I'm standing at the back, greeting everybody as they come by. Jim, who's 6'5", gives me a big hug and steps away. And lo and behold, next in line are my kids. I look, and I look, and I look, and then I screech in delight. I said, "My kids! These are my kids!" And I'm jumping up and down. Turns out, at Alice's suggestion this time, the kids got up at the crack of dawn, drove 150 miles to surprise me. They hid in the back of the sanctuary until that moment. Later that day, as we talked over lunch, I said, "Well executed." They said that they sat there during the service silently saying every word of the pageant, knowing it by heart. But what touched me most was that my daughter, tired as she was from finals, her freshman year, that she chose to reciprocate the surprise we planned for her the spring before. Actually, she was a sophomore now. So this memory too is one that I will cherish forever because there was a way in which she came out of her shell in a new way and threw herself into our family in a way that really made us all be together in a really special way. Some memories are carefully crafted. Families, churches, whole cultures have richer rituals of memory that get reenacted over and over. I suspect that all cultures have rituals of remembering the dead. In Asian cultures, an altar to the ancestors resides in every home. In Latin American cultures, the Day of the Dead is a day of celebrating the loved ones who are no longer there in body by holding a picnic at the cemetery, especially including the favorite foods of the now departed. Catholicism and Buddhism both use prayer beads as a memory and counting tool when reciting formal prayers. In Unitarian Universalism, we have the principles and the children's version of the Rainbow Path as a memory tool that articulates the core values for being in a faith community together. What other practices here are memory devices in your own congregation, the way you do joys and concerns, and I'm sure there are other traditions that you celebrate each year. What about the lighting of the chalice? I know that many congregations give chalice necklaces to graduating youth to head off to college as they begin their young adult lives. Do these chalices function as a kind of testament to all that they have learned and experienced in their home congregations? Both of my kids have worn their chalice necklaces nearly every day since they received them. And when they each inevitably lost theirs in college, they called in a panic and asked for another one. Each of my children has also told me stories about how they met other UUs at college by looking for their flaming chalice necklaces. I once had the parent of a 7th grader tell a story about her daughter who was raised on the UU Rainbow Path. The youth was at school and there was going to be a walkout as part of a legitimate social justice event nationwide. This youth was a conscientious person, followed rules, participated appropriately, was a top student, and part of her UU identity wanted to participate in this justice-themed walkout. But she also wondered if it was the right thing to do because it was like disobeying the rules of the school. So it occurred to her to recite the Rainbow Path: red, respect for all beings; orange, offer fair and kind treatment to all, etc., etc. It was clear to her after she recited that her Unitarian Universalism called for her to stand on the side of love and justice. So that memory device was there for her in her moment of need. Love, like a carefully loaded ship, crosses the gulf between the generations. My mother died 6 years ago after a long decline with vascular dementia. I watched her memory slowly disappear. After several years when she could not remember something from 5 minutes ago, she still had a few long-term memories. I came to see these memories as her core memories. One of these core stories had to do with a gift that was sent to her by her great aunt Marie, which is my daughter Alice's middle name. A gift that was sent to her by her great aunt Marie, a fascinating and independent woman in her day. Marie went on a trip literally around the world by ship by herself in the late 1920s. While in China, she sent my mother a little carved wooden Chinese trunk for her dolls. Right then at age 5, my mother decided she would someday go to China. And she did. She and my father lived in the Far East for 7 years in the 1940s. They got the last flight out of China as the communists took over. When nearly all of her other memories were gone, my mom could still tell me about the little Chinese trunk. The trunk, I think, was more than just a memory. It had focused my mother's dream on a life of travel and adventure and learning about other cultures. And that's where I think it was one of the last memories she carried. It was about her sense of self in the world. Memories are teachers. Memories build connections and relationships. Memories locate us in time and place. Some of the books that I love the best I keep because I remember what I was doing, where I lived, and what the shape of my life was when I was touched by this particular story or learning. Memories also hold our dreams. Sometimes they also open the gate for something new to be created out of something old. One last story. Last summer, my husband and I went on a quick overnight camping trip to a state park about an hour from our home. My family had lived in this area, a small river town, for about 6 years from the time I was 11 to 16. My best friend in junior high was named Jeannie. She had an older brother named Dave, and his girlfriend's name was Kiki. Well, after our camping trip, we were driving home on a Sunday. We stopped in town for something to eat, and we were told we could find some organic food in a place called Kiki's. My mind went, Kiki. Kiki, I know that name. This is a small town. Could it be? So we walked a few blocks and entered the store, and the first person I saw was this young woman who was almost a spitting image of my friend Jeannie. This must be Jeannie's niece. I asked for Kiki, and then she walks out of the back room. To make a long story short, we had a wonderful visit. We got together again for lunch a couple months later and discovered that we have so much in common. She's now married to an Episcopal priest and is really very UU in spirit. With a background in theater, a few years ago she started a Festival of Lights event at the local Episcopal church, and she includes faith leaders from as many traditions as she can, including the local Native elders. So the Sunday after Thanksgiving, I was the UU representative, leading a reading and meditation at the service. Out of that old connection from 45 years ago, I have a dear new friendship. I followed a hunch, took a risk, and am now reweaving a thread from the past into my present. It's as if this old memory was sitting in me like a little seed and blossomed with fresh water and fresh light. I was camping that weekend in old territory with old memories, but I was my old self and also my new self. Harken back to our reading this morning. History is shaped and held in so many ways that mark the heart. Our memories are the hieroglyphics on the inner walls of our hearts, but the meanings and the messages can still change over time. As we age, we see life from new perspectives. The old stories on our walls can live again, and we can write new chapters. What core memories live in your heart? How do they teach and guide? How do they build connections and help you locate yourself in the world? How does your Unitarian Universalism help you frame your life and story and memories? Be prepared, for threads and stories from the past may yet surprise you and gift you in the days to come.